In an aerodynamic stall, the wings lose lift and the plane drops from the sky.
It was the pilot's actions that led to the stall.
They fell at more than 12,000 feet per minute.
Inexplicably, the pilot continued to pull back when he should have been pitching the plane's nose down to gain speed and lift.
The more you raise the nose, the more the lift will be destroyed. And that's what was happening to Air France 447.
Cold Bay, Alaska. A frontier town at the tip of the Alaskan Peninsula, surrounded by the Aleutian Mountains and hundreds of miles of ocean. Reeve Aleutian Airlines is one of Cold Bay's only links to the outside world. It operates a small fleet of rugged planes carrying people and cargo across the state and beyond. Reeve Aleutian Airlines Flight 8 prepares to leave Cold Bay for Seattle, Washington. The route will take the flight over a wide stretch of the North Pacific Ocean. 54-year-old Captain James Gibson is a hardened bush pilot with more than 25 years' experience flying Alaska's tough terrain.
Set takeoff thrust.
Gibson's flight engineer
Thrust set.
is 45-year-old Alaskan Gerald Moose Lauren. His first officer is 39-year-old Gary Lintner.
Generally, we flew that route once a week. On this particular day, we were scheduled for 5 hours of flying time.
Gear up.
Gear up.
Flaps up, Gear.
Flaps up. Reeve 8 is off the ground, about 2-3.
Reeve 8, roger, and have a good flight.
There are 10 passengers on board, mostly hunters and anglers. Wendy Kroon is the senior flight attendant.
We were headed to Seattle. It was a beautiful day. It was clear, no turbulence. Highly unusual, highly unusual. There should have been turbulence.
Pacific winds in the nearby Aleutian Mountains often create turbulent skies. Captain Gibson will cross the North Pacific aboard a Lockheed L-188 Electra, powered by 4 turboprop engines.
They're just an incredibly tough airplane. Stronger than 10 acres of garlic, I used to always say.
Gibson finishes turning his aircraft on course towards Seattle when he hears an unusual buzzing sound.
You hear that, Gear?
I do. Not sure. I noticed that the vibration that I was feeling in my feet and the vibration that was in the glass was different. And that's the first time I'd ever come across that. And I thought, well, this is a little different.
The hell. Moose, have a look, would you?
Yeah, you bet.
As Gibson and Lintner wait for Moose Lauren to report back, the vibrations become more pronounced.
I distinctly remember looking down and seeing my control yoke shaking. And I turned to Jim and I said, Jesus, look at this. And Jim and I are kind of looking at each other across the cockpit. And finally he says,
Oh, screw this. Let's turn around.
Meanwhile, Wendy Kroon helps Lauren check the engines.
The engineer said, I want you to come back and check number 4 engine and see if you can see anything. And just as I looked out the window, the engine went.
It's now up to NTSB investigator Ron Schleed to find out what went wrong.
The loss of a propeller in flight is a very serious event. It can lead to catastrophic accident, has led to catastrophic accidents in the past.
Though the Reeve Aleutian accident was not catastrophic, it is part of a disturbing trend. Since 1965, there have been 4 cases of spontaneous propeller loss on the Electra L-188.
We had an airplane that nearly went into the ocean because a propeller came off. So we needed to find out as best as we could what caused this accident.
For Schleid, there are only 2 possible causes that can explain the loss of the propeller.
A fatigue crack or some other pre-existing damage would cause the whole propeller assembly to separate, and that has happened before. The other possibility is the gearbox, the powered gears that drive the propeller. If there's a catastrophic failure there, that can also cause the engine or the propeller assembly and gearbox to separate. That has also happened in the past.
His team studies what's left of the damaged engine. Right away, it's clear his investigation will be difficult.
The wreckage really didn't give us much of a clue because what we needed to look at was gone.
With no physical evidence to examine, Schleid's team studies the plane's flight data recorder, hoping it can explain the vibration.
The flight recorder on this airplane was a very rudimentary recorder. It records by a stylus scraping a metal foil. And so it's not a very scientific thing compared to what we have today. So we could not, on the flight recorder, determine where the vibration came from.
The Electra has a history of engine vibration. Vibration so serious, it's been known to tear the plane apart at high speed. Investigators examine the rubber mounts designed to absorb those vibrations. If they're worn down, it could explain the accident. But the mounts check out. The investigation hits another dead end.
We could not determine even a probable cause in this case. When you can't do that and have to say, I don't know, that's very hard for an investigator to say.
But there is another question Schleid hopes he can answer. Why was Gibson's plane so hard to land? In 4 other cases, when an Electra's propeller separated, the planes landed without incident.
The loss of a propeller is not necessarily catastrophic. It's designed to fly with only half its engines.
Yet with 3 engines intact, Gibson could barely maintain control of his plane. Something made this case unique. Flight 592 has crashed into one of the most inhospitable spots on Earth, the Florida Everglades.
A large jet aircraft has just crashed out here. Large, like airliner size. Need to get your choppers in the air.
The Everglades covers much of the southern tip of Florida. Hundreds of square miles of shallow swamp, mangroves, and watery grassland. Just getting to the crash site will be a huge challenge for rescuers. Miami-Dade police helicopters find the wreckage of Valuejet Flight 592 in swampland far from the nearest highway.
Federal safety officials say it's the most difficult recovery operation they've ever faced, with wreckage strewn like confetti in a muddy, alligator-infested swamp that can only be reached by helicopter or airboat.
The very waterous, marshy area, and that's proving difficult to reach people that may have survived this crash.
Rescuers know that the first hours of this rescue operation are critical. In 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crashed into the Everglades, 3 miles from the Valuejet crash site. Several passengers drowned before rescuers could reach them.
Yeah, to be in the Everglades after the crash, it was utter devastation, destruction. The smell, you could smell the jet fuel. You could smell the hydraulic fluid. You could smell death.
Most of the aircraft has sunk beneath the surface of the swamp.
The wreckage was in the Everglades. It's a hostile environment. It wasn't clear at that point how much we'd be able to learn from the wreckage or be able to recover.
We suited up as best as possible. We first put on that Tyvek suit, and then we put on an extra sleeve put 2 surgical gloves on, put a pair of work gloves on, and then they duct taped the work gloves to the Tyvek suit.
The heavy gear protects rescuers from spilled fuel and other toxins. But below the surface of the swamp lurks an even deadlier threat.
They had to have a sharpshooter on top of the airboat at all times.
The crash site is a nesting grounds for alligators.
As the divers were walking in the water, if somebody sighted an alligator or you'd hear them hiss in the sawgrass, they would take pot shots to try and scare them away.
Just hours after the crash, officials come to a grim conclusion.
It doesn't look good that there are any survivors.
At an FAA fire test facility,
okay, let's do this.
They hope to recreate the fire that consumed Flight 592.
1 minute to ignition.
We had to trigger one of the oxygen generators manually.
Nothing at all.
We didn't really get much of a fire.
An activated oxygen generator isn't enough to set fire to the cardboard box it's packed in.
So how'd these things start a fire?
NTSB investigators are back at square one. They can't prove their theory.
What were these things packed in?
The failure of the fire test prompts investigators to look more closely at exactly how the oxygen generators were packaged for transport.
The first test we did, we had not packed them exactly the way they were packed.
I need a layer of bubble wrap.
We did not use bubble wrap in the first test, that is, put bubble wrap over the top of the generators before we closed the box. We put 5 boxes of oxygen generators, put them on top of a tire, and put some luggage around them.
Okay, let's start it up.
It made an unbelievable noise. It was a high-pitched scream. We all looked at each other. We were kind of startled. I mean, the sound was deafening.
Ten minutes after ignition, the ceiling of the test cargo container reaches 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Lord almighty. We almost destroyed their test facility.
After 11 minutes, it exceeds the capacity of the monitoring equipment.
All right, let's get that fire out.
We had a raging fire, and none of us had expected a fire to be that big and that hot. And it was just amazing to see how disastrous, how destructive something this long and that big around could be.
The experiment supports the NTSB theory. Improperly packaged oxygen generators caused the crash of Valuejet 592.
Singapore Airlines Flight 6 taxis to the runway through heavy wind and rain at Taipei's Chiang Kai-shek Airport. Taiwan sits inside Asia's infamous Typhoon Alley, and tonight, the island nation is bracing for the worst. Typhoon Jiangsing, with winds of 99 miles an hour, is closing in fast. Flight 6 needs to get airborne before the brunt of the storm hits. There are 179 people on board the overnight flight to Los Angeles, including business traveler Francois Perron.
Being a frequent flyer, I was not too concerned about the weather because that did not bother me in the past.
Perron has requested an aisle seat. The only one available on this flight is in row 65, the second to the last row of the plane. He has no idea how important his seating assignment will become.
Singapore 6, for your information, surface wind 020 at 24, gust 43.
Thank you, sir. Singapore 6.
Let me know when it hits 30.
If the crosswind hits 30 knots, the crew will have to abandon their takeoff.
Singapore 6, you are cleared for takeoff, runway 05 left.
Okay, thrust left, toga, toga.
Captain Fu Chi Kong decides to proceed with the takeoff.
Okay, my control.
The 747 accelerates towards takeoff speed, 180 miles an hour.
V1.
V1.
As the plane was gaining speed to take off, at a certain time, the plane kind of lost it.
The plane's tanks are loaded with 15,000 gallons of fuel. It ignites immediately.
Direct emergency vehicles, runway 05 left.
Rescuers must battle both the flames and the violent storm. The massive 747 is broken into pieces. Of the 179 passengers and crew, 83 are dead. Most victims were seated in the middle of the plane, where the fuel-fed fire was most severe. The 96 survivors include all 3 pilots, some passengers in first class, and everyone in the rear section, where Francois Perron was seated. One of Asia's busiest airports is immediately closed. It is now up to the Aviation Safety Council of Taiwan to determine the cause of the disaster. Taiwanese investigators still can't answer why the crew of Singapore Airlines Flight 6 made the fatal error of turning onto the wrong runway. Determined to find out what went wrong on Flight 6, investigators decide to put themselves in the pilot's seat, the cockpit of a 747 at Chiang Kai-shek Airport.
All right, let's get going.
In similar weather conditions, they follow the route taken by Flight 6. They taxi slowly towards runway 5 left, matching Captain Fung's speed. The plane turns onto the final taxiway. From this point, the Flight 6 crew should have taxied past runway 5 right, towards the turn for runway 5 left.
Now we continue on to 5 right. How could they have missed that sign? It's huge.
Signs marking 5 right are clearly visible from the cockpit. But investigators see nothing that would tell a pilot the runway is out of service. But inside the cockpit, there is an indication that the plane is on the wrong runway. The instrument landing system isn't locking onto a beacon that should be dead ahead.
This should tell you something's not right.
If the plane had been on the correct runway, the display would have been centered. Before departing, pilots programmed the plane's computer to lock onto a beacon at the end of their designated runway. Flight 6's navigation system would have been scanning for that signal just before takeoff. The beacon was clearly off to their left, not ahead of them. Captain Foong was taxiing at a speed of 9 knots, about 9 miles an hour. Because the turn took so long, Captain Foong might have thought he'd gone further than he really did. So much time had passed that he may have thought he had already reached runway 5 left. Just before takeoff, the crew had one last chance to avoid disaster.
Now the PVD hasn't lined up.
It should have been a warning to the crew that something was wrong.
Never mind. We can see the runway just fine.
Captain Foong ignores the warning.
Okay, my control.
V1.
V1.
What happened next was inevitable.
There's something there.
There's the point of impact. The clues were there. They ignored them.
It's finally clear why Singapore Airlines Flight 6 ended up on the wrong runway. But with hundreds of planes taking off during the annual typhoon season, the challenge now is to make sure it never happens again. At Jakarta Air Traffic Control, Silk Air 185 has vanished from radar. The controller has heard no Mayday call. He tries to get a message to the missing flight with the help of another pilot.
Indonesia 238 Jakarta.
Go ahead, Indonesia 238.
Please relay to Silk Air 185 to contact Singapore 134.4.
Roger, Indonesia 238.
But the 737 is already submerged beneath the murky waters of Indonesia's Musi River, halfway between Jakarta and Singapore. Local villagers report the crash.
They're telling stories about the aircraft coming very fast from an altitude.
Along the river, people search for survivors, but find only small bits of debris. A 50-ton aircraft carrying 104 people has all but disappeared. News of the Silk Air crash has met with shock in Singapore, home to almost half the passengers. There is very little hope that anyone has survived. 24 hours later, following the crash of Silk Air 185, Indonesian investigator Santoso Sayogo takes charge of the team from the National Transportation Safety Committee.
Empty those bags. Put it with the other bags for processing.
What we did is to go to the crash site, observe, and then record and preserve anything that we can use for the later investigation.
Or small debris.
The scale of the disaster soon becomes evident. There are no survivors. All 104 passengers and crew have been killed, including veteran pilot Captain Xu Wei Ming and his first officer Duncan Ward.
It was just complete bewilderment as to how it might have happened. In that situation, you go into a complete state of shock. I didn't really know what to believe.
In 1991, nearly 7 years before the Silk Air crash,
A United Airlines 737 on approach to Colorado Springs took a sudden roll to the right. It hit the ground seconds later, killing everyone on board. Three years later, it happened again. 132 people died when a U.S. Air 737 crashed near Pittsburgh. Both accidents were caused by the same type of rudder malfunction.
That was a big concern because all of a sudden now you have the airplane doing things that the crew isn't anticipating.
Okay, wrap it up.
Investigators feared that the deadly rudder phenomenon may have struck again.
If the rudder had failed and it had gone hard over, as we had seen in these other events, that would have exposed it to higher aerodynamic loads and would have separated from the aircraft.
Even more disturbing, the rudder problem was supposed to have been solved. Boeing engineers came up with a fix before construction even began on the 737 that crashed in Indonesia.
For the accident aircraft, Boeing already modified the rudder.
So the question is, why would this airplane have had an experience like that, given the fact that it had the modifications to the rudder?
It is now crucial that the team figure out exactly when Flight 185's tail section broke off. Did it detach at 35,000 feet, throwing the plane into a dive? Or did something else cause the rapid descent, causing the tail to break off on the way down?
We had to examine the wreckage, see how these stabilizers came off, and then put that storyline together.
On day 5 of the investigation, there's a major breakthrough. Divers have found a key piece of the investigative puzzle in the mud at the bottom of the Musi River.
The accident happened on the 19th December, and we discovered flight data recorder in the afternoon of the 24th, one day before Christmas.
I can confirm. It is the FDR. Slightly damaged, but it doesn't look too bad.
It was kept in clean water just to preserve the information on it so it would not deteriorate.
If the FDR recording has survived, investigators should soon know exactly when Flight 185's tail section began to break off.
It's up to the guys in Washington now.
A team from Peru's Aviation Accident Investigation Commission must answer that question. Patrick Frickberg is in charge.
The first impression that I got, it was the terrible smell of fuel and blood. It was still burning 24 hours after it crashed. It amazed us that somebody had survived.
Gracias a ese cambio de asiento que tuve,
thanks to my seat change, because I couldn't fit into the seat because of my size, they changed me to row 10, the emergency exit row. And that's why I had a chance to survive.
Frickberg is also amazed by the looting.
But they were taking anything they could carry from the wreckage site. They took tires, oxygen bottles, doors, metal pieces, parts of the landing gear. And maybe there was an interest of exchanging them for money.
The small troop of government soldiers at the crash site.
Excuse me, I'm with CIAA. I'm gonna need your help, please.
Can't protect all the evidence.
It was huge as well, so it wasn't that easy of a situation to control.
Hey, I need both these engines guarded around the clock. No exceptions.
Frickberg is forced to preserve the most important pieces.
We could distinguish the engines, but everything else was into small pieces.
We need to take pictures of everything before it's all gone. Let's go.
What he can't guard, he tries to document.
I mean, the pieces were there, the flight controls were there. We found the cockpit, parts of the cockpit. We found the seats. We were mainly worried about recovering the flight data recordings and the cockpit voice recorder.
Hope of getting some answers is renewed when within hours they find one of the plane's 2 black boxes. Since Peru lacks the technology to read the data, the cockpit voice recorder will be shipped to the NTSB in Washington for analysis.
It's like a rush because, okay, we have something to work with now.
But the second black box, the flight data recorder, is still nowhere to be found.
Any sign of the FDR? Well, I can guess what happened to it. Keep looking.
It's more than likely that looters have taken the FDR.
Watching that some of the evidence was being taken away, we were very, very frustrated that we could not have a better control of the crash site.
With the evidence they need disappearing by the minute, they post a $500 reward for the return of the flight data recorder.
It tells us how the engines were, or the systems were performing until they crashed, until the aircraft crashes. So it's pretty necessary information to have.
It seems that $500 was too good to pass up for one man in Pucallpa. In a major breakthrough for investigators, the man agrees to exchange the second black box for the reward money.
He was pretty much the good guy at the time.
Frickberg needs to know how they could have made such a fundamental error. He reviews the events leading up to the crash, a perfect storm of unlikely events and tragic mistakes. It starts.
You can sit in the cabin if you prefer.
With a broken seatbelt on the first officer's jump seat. The captain is left flying with only a young, inexperienced trainee.
Textbook, Major.
Thank you, sir.
You remind me of myself.
Look at that beast.
Captain Perez Palma misjudges the storm.
We can get in through here.
And flies right through it. Intense hail shatters the windshield.
Do you have the runway in sight?
Blinding the crew.
No, I don't have it.
When a massive downdraft hits, the pilots don't notice their plane is descending until the ground proximity alarm goes off. Then they make the biggest mistake of all. They fail to throttle up.
Move with me.
Investigators conclude that happened as the result of one critical decision taken moments earlier by Captain Perez Palma.
It sealed their fate.
Investigators analyze a pivotal decision made by the captain of Flight 204 less than a minute before the crash.
At the last moment, he took control.
When he began to lose confidence in his co-pilot,
or maybe I have it, okay?
He took command and became the pilot flying the plane. At that moment, Chirinos Delgado became first officer.
Gear down? Not yet.
The pilots have switched roles.
Look at the speed, you idiot!
Both seem confused by the transition.
Hurry with the flaps!
It's now the co-pilot's job to monitor the changes in altitude.
Flaps 5. Okay, flaps 5.
But he's distracted by the demands of the captain.
Never both pilots are looking outside at the same time. Never. Always one of the pilots must keep close contact with the instruments.
I can't see it! I can't see anything! Pull it, okay? Move with me!
Though both pilots were pulling back, they both likely assumed the other one would take the crucial second step needed to get out of trouble, pushing the throttles forward to maximum thrust.
When pilots are too confident and self-sufficient, they get used to the idea that nothing will happen.
We'll make it.
Call it lack of discipline or not obeying the rules, but that's what happened.
At Los Angeles International Airport, United Airlines Flight 718 is preparing to depart for Chicago. At 9:04 in the morning, Flight 718 lifts off from Los Angeles. Captain Shirley must follow an assigned corridor through the airspace around Los Angeles. After that, he's free to fly wherever he wants, as long as he reports in, passing a series of waypoints along the route to Chicago. 54 minutes into the flight, the DC-7 reaches its second waypoint. The crew will next check in when they cross a point on the map known as the Painted Desert Line. Cruising at 21,000 feet, the crew spots thunderclouds ahead and adjusts their course.
How we doing on your side, Bob? Thunderhead 5 miles south. We're clear of it. Damn!
Shocked passengers have no idea what's gone wrong.
Oh, God! Bank, 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 bank! Come on, baby, come on!
Flight 718 is overdue to check in. Calls from dispatch go unanswered. Air Traffic Control Headquarters in Salt Lake City.
CA Salt Lake.
Controllers here don't normally communicate directly with flight crews. They get flight information by phone from airline dispatchers who are in radio contact with their pilots. At 10:51, they get a disturbing call from United Airlines dispatch.
Salt Lake. Understand, United 718, 20 minutes overdue at Painted Desert.
Moments later, another dispatcher calls. More disturbing news.
Salt Lake, TWA. I'm getting no response from Flight 2.
Understand, TWA, Flight 2, 20 minutes overdue at Painted Desert. We have had no contact here.
Controllers now know that 2 planes flying from LA have not reported crossing a scheduled waypoint, the Painted Desert Line. United Flight 718 and TWA Flight 2 to Kansas City were both expected to reach that waypoint at 10:31. Controllers send out a bulletin asking local authorities to keep an eye out for the 2 missing planes. The next morning, news comes from authorities in Arizona, confirming everyone's worst fears.
They found him?
The remains of 2 different planes have been spotted in Arizona's Grand Canyon. The twisted wreckage of United 718 lies on a rocky ledge 688 feet up the sheer canyon wall. The Air Tour pilot spots the second crash site on the floor of the canyon, about 1 mile away. The immediate priority is to get rescuers into one of the least accessible places in North America. When rescuers finally reach the crash area, they first find the scattered remains of TWA Flight 2. Reaching the wreckage of the other plane will be even more difficult. It's not long before rescuers come to a grim conclusion. Everyone aboard both planes is dead. It is now up to investigators from the Civil Aeronautics Board to piece together what happened. With no cockpit voice recorder to help them, investigators turned to radio dispatch recordings and transcripts. TWA Flight 2 took off 3 minutes ahead of the United flight in a different direction. It was to fly northeast towards its first checkpoint, Daggett. The TWA pilot was Jack Gandy. With 15,000 hours as captain, he was nearly as experienced as United's Bob Shirley. Gandy knew these skies well. He'd flown this route nearly 200 times.
Good morning, TWA Dispatch, TWA 2. We've got a little bit of weather here we want to get on top of. Be a good man and ask Salt Lake to clear us to 21,000.
Roger, TWA 2, requesting clearance at 21,000 feet.
So, TWA asked for 21,000. So Salt Lake clears them?
No. Request denied due to conflicting traffic.
Advise.
Advisory TWA2, unable to approve to 1000 due to traffic.
That's a no-go on 21,000. United 718 is there.
Captain Gandy wants to avoid the clouds in his path. And in 1956, he has another way to accomplish that.
Let's just get on top of this stuff.
He uses visual flight rules, or VFR.
Roger that. Advise Salt Lake I'm going to VFR and 1,000 on top.
Salt Lake, TWA2 requesting 1,000 on top.
Maintain at least 1000 on top. Advise TWA2 his traffic is United 718, direct Durango.
The TWA crew was cleared to fly 1,000 feet above the clouds, but warned to look out for United 718. Half an hour after requesting 1,000 on top, Gandy reports his actual altitude.
21,000 feet.
Investigators now understand how the TWA flight ended up at the same altitude as United 718. As for why both planes diverted from their scheduled routes at the same time.
Damn! What's he doing there? Pull up! Pull up!
The answer is the crash site itself. An awe-inspiring natural wonder.
Let's give him a look, shall we? Aye, Captain.
Wonderful sights to see way down below. The Grand Canyon, for instance, one of the 7 wonders of the world.
Just keep your eyes peeled and you'll get a spectacular view no matter where you're sitting. Damn!
But on June 30th, 1956, it proves fatal.
Oh, God!
Jack Parshall needs to find out how such a common practice killed 128 people. The seasoned crew of American Airlines Flight 191
Rudder set.
makes final preparations for takeoff.
Spoilers armed.
From Chicago's O'Hare Airport. The DC-10's 3-engine layout makes it one of the most recognizable passenger jets on the runway. On this flight, a live feed from a video camera mounted in the cockpit allows passengers to watch the takeoff from the cabin.
American 191, you are cleared for takeoff.
American 191.
Underway. You have control. I have control. Runway clear? Clear. Okay, setting takeoff thrust. Here we go. Damn. There's the turbulence. Not too rough. I've lost power to my side.
The captain's instruments suddenly go dead.
Looks like we've lost number 1.
And he's lost power from the left engine. But the plane is already airborne.
Look at this. Look at this. Equipment. I need equipment. He blew an engine.
The DC-10 should be able to climb with only 2 engines. Pilots are trained to cope with this kind of emergency. First, they need to get as far from the ground as they can. They put their plane into a steeper climb. Forward speed drops.
We're banking. Go right, go right.
The plane is banking sharply to the left. It's only 325 feet from the ground.
I can't hold it.
American 191 Heavy, do you copy?
He's not talking to me.
Losing power from one engine should not be causing the plane to bank. Passengers have a frightening view of the ground below.
What's going on?
The pilots can't get the altitude they need, and they're banking further and further to the left.
I'm losing it. Go right, go right. Come on, come on. 300 feet, we're losing altitude.
The cockpit camera gives passengers a glimpse of their fate. But they are not the only ones whose lives are in danger. A trailer park just north of the airport is home to thousands of people.
Oh, God.
And the plane is heading straight for it. Eyewitnesses on the ground can clearly see Flight 191 flying on its side.
We're still turning! Level, baby, level! Brace, brace, brace!
The DC-10 crashes into an airport hangar at the edge of the airport. The full load of fuel instantly ignites.
DC-10 with 271 souls on board has gone down, northwest of runway 32 right.
American Airlines Flight 191 has crashed just short of the trailer park beside Chicago's O'Hare Airport. The DC-10 has also obliterated a hangar beyond the runway. Once the fire is under control, the search for survivors can begin. All 271 people on board are dead. It's the worst aviation disaster in U.S. history. Investigator Michael Marks believes the shattered pieces from the engine pylon may explain why Flight 191 fell from the sky.
Hey, look for yourself. See, that had to happen before the crash.
A close examination reveals a crack in the metal that clearly developed slowly over time. It's a telltale sign that the pylon bulkhead was already damaged before the crash.
You can see where it's spread, all along there.
The crack that Michael Marks finds runs along the top edge of the aft bulkhead. The microscopic examination gives Marks another clue, a dent on the pylon bulkhead at exactly the point where the crack began. Investigators arrange to watch as another DC-10 undergoes the same maintenance that was performed on Flight 191 just weeks before the crash. To save time, the airline has modified a key maintenance procedure.
Okay, bring her up!
The normal procedure for servicing an engine involves removing it from the pylon and leaving the pylon attached to the wing. There are hundreds of connections to be undone. The quicker way involves taking out just 3 bolts. The engine is removed from the wing while still attached to the pylon. It saves about 200 man-hours of labor.
Now up!
Maneuvering the pylon into position with an engine attached to it is a tricky procedure.
I think I know what happened.
A possible explanation surfaces.
Take her down.
For the mysterious dent found on the pylon from Flight 191. The team in Tulsa calls Marks.
What do you got?
They describe how the maintenance crew struggled to fit the pylon attachment into the mounting bracket, or clevis. Marks concludes that on the accident plane, the clevis must have slammed into the top of the pylon bulkhead as the engine was being reattached. The impact could have started the crack that led to the pylon's failure and to the crash itself. Over the next 8 weeks, each time the plane took off, the stress that the massive engine put on the pylon made the crack grow larger. It was only a matter of time before the pylon snapped and the engine fell off.
How long have you been putting the engines on this way?
Not sure, but every airline does it.
Even more worrying, the mechanics at American Airlines are not the only ones cutting corners. It is now clear why the engine fell from the plane. December 28, 1978.
We're losing an engine.
United Airlines Flight 173 is less than 22 miles from Portland International Airport. The plane's engines are flaming out one after another. With 2 engines gone, the autopilot can no longer fly the plane. McBroom must get the crippled DC-8 to the airport himself. The engineer struggles to keep the last 2 engines running.
We just lost 1 and 2.
Flight 173 has now lost all 4 engines. With no engines running, backup batteries now provide power to only critical instruments. The 100-ton aircraft is losing more than 3,000 feet of altitude a minute. At this rate, the They will be lucky to stay airborne for as long as 90 seconds. Now, Captain McBroom makes a horrifying calculation.
I can't make it.
The airport is too far away.
Okay, declare Mayday. Portland Tower, United 173, heavy Mayday.
He declared Mayday, and then in a very, what seemed to me like a calm, matter-of-fact voice, I could hear the pilot.
The engines are flaming out. We're going down. We're not going to be able to make it to the airport.
We lost power. We're going down.
Emergency services are told what's happening.
Flight 173's flamed out. They're going down.
The DC-8 is coming down over a densely populated suburb. Suddenly, Captain McBroom sees what he's been looking for. A dark area up ahead. It looks like an empty field.
The place that you want to put it is where there's minimum buildings, the most open area possible, because the 200,000 pounds plus jet arriving at 140 knots, which is 160 plus miles an hour, it's going to do a lot of damage to the things on the ground.
Putting the plane on this narrow strip of land is McBroom's best bet. But as he gets closer, he realizes it isn't an open field.
We can't make it.
It's a heavily wooded suburb, and he's headed straight for it.
If they're woods and that's all you have, then you're going to have to deal with it. The tops of trees are pretty soft. As you settle into the trees, they get progressively less soft. They're going to do a lot of damage.
McBroom doesn't give up. He actually tries to steer the plane between the trees. The passengers still assume they're about to touch down on a runway.
We clipped the top of a few trees, and that felt like we were making the initial landing at the airport. So my first sense was, hooray, we're there. And then all hell broke loose.
I saw the bright flash out there and knew he had gone down.
The plane carves a 1,600-foot-long path through the trees. Incredibly, the DC-8 has crash-landed in the middle of a major American city without injuring a single person on the ground. Most of the 189 passengers and crew are alive, including Captain Albert McBroom.
We're losing an engine.
NTSB investigator Alan Deal has discovered something crucial on the CDR.
It's flamed out. What?
Less than 8 minutes before the DC-8 crashes into a Portland suburb, the captain seems unconvinced that low fuel is behind his engine failure.
He was asking what was causing that, and he got a very adamant answer saying fuel.
Fuel.
As if to say, we've been trying to tell you about this all along.
Hoping those crossfeeds there or something.
There are crossfeed valves that are opened in a specific sequence to let one tank feed one or more engines. And it's the job of the flight engineer, in the case of a DC-8, to know exactly how to do that.
Showing fumes.
Though the crew couldn't agree on exactly how much was left.
Oh, showing 1,000 or better. I don't think it's in there.
One thing is certain. There isn't enough to keep the engines running.
Losing an engine. It's flamed out.
It takes a few things to make an engine run. One of them is fuel.
You got that crossfeed open?
Captain McBroom is desperate. He needs to get more fuel to the remaining engines.
No, I haven't got it open. Which one? Open them both. Damn it, get some fuel in there.
Each of the plane's 4 engines has its own fuel tank. Opening the crossfeed should allow fuel to flow between the 4 main tanks.
Number 2 is empty.
But it's not working.
You're gonna lose number 3 in a minute, too.
One by one, fuel starvation shuts down all the engines, leaving the DC-8 without any power.
Okay, declare a mayday.
The engines didn't have any fuel.
We knew that the aircraft ran out of fuel. So then became the question, why? Why would a modern transport aircraft like this run out of fuel?
Investigators focus on two possibilities: mechanical failure or human error.
Was it a crew problem or was it an aircraft problem?
Investigators desperately need to know what happened during the final moments of Flight 9633. They catch a break when they learn that an airport security camera off the end of the runway recorded the Yak-42 as it finally lifted off. The grainy image could provide a crucial lead.
Whoa. Can you play that again?
The video shows that the plane was properly configured for takeoff, but beyond that, it holds no new information. No clue as to what went wrong.
Okay, they started here. They lifted off here.
The airport runway wasn't the issue. They had plenty of room to take off.
They had about 2,800 plus meters of runway available.
That's more than twice the distance they should need.
Something kept the plane on the ground. The question is, what? They suspect the plane might simply have been too heavy.
Aside from being harder to get in the air if you weigh more, and anything that weighs more is going to be harder to accelerate.
It's a lesson that was learned nearly 9 years earlier in Charlotte, North Carolina. All 21 people aboard a commuter plane died when it crashed and burst into flames less than a minute after takeoff. The plane was 579 pounds above the allowed maximum. Weight was also considered a key factor in the U.S. Army's deadliest peacetime crash. On Aero Air Flight 1285, the weight of 248 soldiers equipped with heavy gear was underestimated. Their DC-8 fell from the sky 2,900 feet beyond the end of the runway in Gander, Newfoundland. Everyone on board was killed.
If the weight is underestimated or not calculated at all, you just don't have that clear picture of what exactly to expect from the airplane.
They didn't know their weight.
Concerns mount when investigators learn that Yak Service didn't have baggage scales at Yaroslavl's airport.
There was no way to weigh the gear, the luggage and the cargo that would be loaded in the airplane, so it was estimated.
Investigators estimate the weight of the team and their hockey gear. Ultimately, they find the plane was not overloaded.
The weight is under the limit.
It may not be the answer, but it provides an important clue.
It does not appear that was a contributing issue on this in this case, but it shows that the crew was not properly preparing the information they would need during the takeoff roll.
Results from the brake system analysis are in. There's no evidence of mechanical failure. The finding moves the investigation closer to a disturbing conclusion. One of the pilots must have applied the brakes himself. A review of the crew's flight records offers up a clue. Both pilots routinely trained on and flew two different versions of the Yak plane. The Yak-40 is a much older regional jet that carries up to 32 passengers. The larger Yak-42, which the hockey team was on, debuted in 1980. Both pilots were more experienced on the older Yak-40, but they also regularly flew the newer Yak-42.
It is improper and incorrect to train a pilot to fly two airplanes at the same time.
It's beginning to look like the crew's habit of flying two different but similar planes may have led to confusion in the cockpit. Focusing in on the brake pedals, investigators spot a small but potentially significant difference. On the older Yak-40, a pilot rests his foot on the brake. On the newer Yak-42, he must put his heel on the floor.
They were flying back and forth, these two different kinds of aircraft, which happened to have different ways of putting their feet on the brake pedal. And that was when the aha started to appear.
A pilot accustomed to flying the older Yak might have placed his whole foot on the pedal, and as a result, could have activated the brakes. It's a promising theory, but questions remain. Investigators can't understand why a pilot wouldn't notice his mistake right away.
You'd have to put about 10, 15, 20 pounds of pressure onto the pedals. And that is a significant weight. You would think a person would feel that.
They find a clue in the crew's medical records. First Officer Igor Zhivyelov had secretly been treated for a nerve condition. He should not have been certified to fly.
He was losing the sensations in his legs. It was a medical development. It didn't make him fall down, but it made him less aware of feedback from feelings in his feet.
So the argument was made that the first officer could have been pressing on the brake pedals without even realizing it.
Then investigators make another startling discovery.
Football.
The brakes didn't just slow the plane down, they also prevented liftoff.
It's going to pitch you down because you are being pushed by engines that are above the brakes. It's going to give the aircraft a nose-down pitch.
By engaging the brakes on the rotating wheels, the crew was actually forcing the nose down. The effect was like glue, sticking the plane to the runway.
He probably set stabilizer too low.
The combined errors meant the plane was doomed
Football!
as soon as it was airborne.
At that point, the braking force of contact of the tires with the runway now stops. And all the other forces that you've been putting into the aircraft, pulling back on the yoke, elevator trim, flaps, just to get the nose up, they are now no longer counteracted by the nose down force of the braking. The aircraft immediately goes into a nose up, a high pitch rate, 20 degrees up in about 2 seconds, and you can't stay in the air.
The sudden nose-up attitude causes the wings to quickly lose lift. Drag increases, the speed drops, the plane goes into a stall.
And you're just a big hunk of metal and fuel and flesh just falling to the air.
Polish Air Force Flight 101 is carrying 89 passengers, including President Lech Kaczynski. 4 of Poland's best pilots are in the cockpit. They're elite military airmen from the country's Special Aviation Regiment. Just after 10 o'clock, the plane begins its descent to Smolensk. The state flight from Warsaw took off at 9:27 this morning. Few understand Poland's troubled past better than President Kaczynski. By visiting a memorial near the site of the massacre, the Polish president is taking an important step towards reconciliation. The elite crew is flying a Tupolev Tu-154M, an extremely popular Russian-built plane. As they get closer to the airport, the workload picks up. Flight engineer Andrzej Mikalik must calculate engine performance.
May I please have the temperature and pressure?
I'll tell you what the temperature is. Cold.
He needs some vital information from the tower.
Are we going to speak Russian?
Yes.
English is the international language of civil aviation. But since Smolensk is a military airport, controllers here speak only Russian. Passenger jets don't normally land at this base. But for the Polish delegation, it's the closest runway to the Katyn Memorial. Captain Arkadiusz Portaziuk is the only member of this Polish crew who speaks Russian. He'll have to handle the communication with the tower.
Polski 101, Polish 101. Good morning.
Polish 101, acknowledge. Polish Air Force, we have fog. Visibility is 400 meters.
Understood. Polish Air Force 101. Heavy fog, visibility is only 400 meters.
Smolensk Air Base doesn't have the equipment needed for a radio-guided landing. The pilots will first have to descend to just above 300 feet, then look for the runway. Once they spot it, they'll have to land manually.
Temperature and pressure, please.
Temperatures +2, pressure 745. We do not have landing conditions.
Continuing our approach, if we're unable to land, we'll go around on autopilot.
Captain Protagiuk takes his plane lower to get a first-hand look at landing conditions. But as they get closer, the fog gets even thicker.
Approaching outer marker. On course.
Then, the situation takes a turn for the worse. As the crew strains to catch sight of the runway, the sound of an alarm suddenly fills the cockpit.
100 meters.
Terrain.
We are leaving for a go-around.
90 meters.
But the crew is struggling to make the plane climb.
20!
No one has survived. It's a monumental tragedy. One of the darkest days in Polish history. A day that was to have been commemorated by the president himself will now be remembered for yet another tragedy.
Director, the fog has rolled in.
Investigators refocus their attention on the cockpit voice recorder.
Turn on your landing lights.
Lights on.
They hear a warning that the plane is dangerously low. But strangely, the pilots don't seem to react to it.
You can't see a thing.
Turn on your landing lights.
Investigators are puzzled by the crew's behavior. They compare the plane's intended flight path to the altitudes called out by the navigator.
100 meters. 90 meters. 40. 30. 20.
Stop. 40.
Just after the navigator calls out 65 feet,
20.
the unmistakable sound of the plane hitting the first tree.
20 meters? They hit the tree at 11 meters, not 20.
Something's not right. The navigator is calling out 65 feet, but the plane is only 36 feet from the ground.
They didn't know the altitude.
The recording leaves investigators with two important questions. Why did the crew ignore the alarms? And why were they closer to the ground than they thought? The team pores over the flight data, checking for signs of an altimeter malfunction.
Lieutenant,
It could explain the crash.
what happens here?
But instead of a malfunction, they find that the altimeter reading makes a sudden jump. A barometric altimeter shows the plane's height above sea level by measuring atmospheric pressure. Air pressure goes up as the plane goes down. The numbers show that the instrument was reset to its default setting, a move that resulted in an altimeter reading much higher than the plane's actual height above the ground.
Why would a pilot do that?
Polish investigators take their questions to pilots from the same special regiment that flew the president.
What do you think they were doing?
They learn that military pilots sometimes use the barometric altimeter to solve an annoying problem. The altimeter is connected to the Terrain Altitude Warning System, or TAWS. It alerts pilots if they're getting too close to the ground. The alarm goes off so frequently at military airports that some pilots have developed a dangerous habit of disregarding the sound. They've also come up with ways to silence the nuisance alarms. One way is to simply reset the altimeter. That fools the system into thinking the plane is flying at a higher altitude.
Start playback.
It seems incredible that such an elite crew flying such high-ranking passengers would commit a breach of procedures.
100 meters.
Even if they did, it doesn't explain why the navigator was calling out the wrong altitude during the descent.
90 meters.
Stop playback. He was using his radio altimeter.
Most large jets are equipped with two types of altimeter.
40.
Since the barometric altimeter has been reset,
30.
the navigator could only have been using the second one. When the radio altimeter read 300 feet, the Air Force jet was not 300 feet above the airport. It was 300 feet from the bottom of the valley. Once they cleared the valley, they were just above the treetops. The radio altimeter was giving them misleading information. It doomed everyone on board. January 25th, 2010. It's just past midnight at Beirut's International Airport. Captain Habtamu Nagasa has been flying with Ethiopian Airlines for over 20 years and has more than 10,000 hours in the cockpit.
Exterior checks complete? Check complete, no problems.
The first officer is far less experienced. Alula Bayene is a recent graduate of the Ethiopian Airlines Flight Academy. Tonight, there are 82 passengers aboard the Boeing 737. They are preparing for an overnight flight to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Flight 409's flight plan calls for it to head southwest, then make a U-turn towards a navigational checkpoint called Cheka. Ethiopian Airlines 409 lifts off just after 2:30 in the morning. The captain begins banking the plane to the right as he climbs.
Ethiopian 409, control 19.3, Ma Salama.
The tower controller bids the crew goodbye and hands the flight off to a colleague.
Ethiopian 409, good morning. Climb flight level 290.
The area controller instructs Flight 409 to climb to 29,000 feet.
Flight level 290, Ethiopian 409.
But the weather ahead is becoming fierce. Just a few minutes into the flight, something is going wrong. An alarm warns the crew that their turn is becoming dangerously steep. Captain Nagasa is struggling to correct the problem. He veers back to the left towards the thunderstorm the controller wants him to avoid. The controller sees that Flight 409 is starting to veer back towards Beirut. He warns the pilots again that they need to turn.
Ethiopian 409.
Follow heading 270.
Turn right, heading 270.
Right, heading 270, roger.
Okay, what heading did he say?
270, set.
The cockpit fills with a disturbing sound.
What is it?
The control columns vibrate, warning them that the plane is about to stall.
Speed! What is it? Go around, go around.
Roger, go around.
The captain pushes the throttle all the way up to go around power. But their situation is even more dire.
God! Oh God! Oh God!
As day breaks, wreckage begins to wash up on shore. Navy ships recover floating debris and some human remains. 82 passengers and 8 crew are dead. Investigators return to the CDR. They hope the crew's conversation can shed light on why 2 qualified pilots lost control of a mechanically sound airplane.
Exterior checks complete? Check complete, no problems.
They notice something odd. The first officer is uncharacteristically quiet.
Okay, engage the autopilot.
Even worse, he's not following his captain's commands.
Hold on. Stop for a second.
The crew's behavior is baffling. It forces investigators to consider an unlikely explanation for what went wrong, something called subtle incapacitation. It's a controversial idea that goes beyond the usual definition of pilot error.
What is it? This room doesn't make you sleepy?
investigators continue to analyze the cockpit recording.
What are these guys doing?
They listen to what the pilots were saying just before takeoff.
What are they doing up there?
Was there weed in it?
Did you feel dizzy?
Oh, I couldn't sleep.
Well, me too.
Investigators are shocked to hear the pilots joking about being tired and the reference to weed.
That would have changed things.
Subtle incapacitation may not be such an unlikely cause after all. Subtle incapacitation is difficult to prove. In the crash of Flight 409, the evidence so far is mixed. But what investigators discover next could tip the balance.
Gear up.
Employment records detailing the pilot's flight hours.
Heading select.
Heading select. Check.
Reveal critical information about the captain of Flight 409. He'd been working almost non-stop for nearly 2 months.
The 51 days, he probably flew something like 45 days out of the 51.
The crew's last chance to rest was a scheduled stopover after flying into Beirut.
I could use some food that didn't come from an airplane. What do you say?
Yeah. Good meal will be good.
All right, let's do it. Didn't have a lot of water today.
Oh, she'll bring back for some. She'll bring some. Oh, here we go.
Did you feel dizzy?
Oh, I couldn't sleep.
Investigators suspect that the heavy meal kept them awake at night. The storm conditions likely added to the pilot's stress. Fatigued and under increasing stress, they lost track of where they were and what they were doing.
Go around. Go around. Go around.
Roger. Go around.
Investigators conclude the accident was caused by a crew that was simply too tired or too confused to recover from the first wrong turn. It's a textbook example of subtle incapacitation. Merida Airport, Venezuela. On February 21, 2008, the crew of Santa Barbara Airlines Flight 518 arrives for the last flight of the day. Captain Aldino Garanito Gomez is a senior pilot and flight instructor for the airline with over 5,000 hours in the air. The captain's first officer today is one of his closest friends. Dennis Ferreira Quintal has over 2,000 flying hours. This afternoon, First Officer Ferreira Quintal is handling the flying.
"70 knots.
The captain monitors the instruments.
V1 and rotate. Gear up. Check. We're up.
Flight 518 is bound for Venezuela's capital, Caracas. The airline operates this 90-minute flight 3 times daily. Navigating the mountainous terrain around Merida demands a lot from pilots. The official flight plan takes planes southwest through a river valley, so they can gain height before looping back to the north and over the mountains towards Caracas. Flight 518 turns left as it climbs out of the valley. Then, 6 minutes into the flight, something begins to go wrong. An alarm is sounding a warning that the plane is dangerously close to the ground.
Santa Barbara 518, do you copy? Santa Barbara 518, please respond.
15 minutes later, Flight 518 hasn't checked in as scheduled.
518 is missing, 43 passengers on board.
As daylight fades at Narita Airport, a search and rescue team gets ready to launch. When a flight goes missing, rescuers often use a plane's radar track to pinpoint its last position. But Narita Airport has no radar. The rescuers don't know where to find Flight 518.
Okay, we don't have a last known position, so the search radius here is going to be large, okay?
With no other clues to follow, they start their search by air. Then comes distressing news from high in the Andes. Mountain villagers have reported a plane crash 6 miles from Merida. There's no word about any survivors. Rescuers, carried by helicopter, arrive at Los Conejos, a remote Andes mountaintop. The air is thin, the temperature near freezing.
Let's leave our...
Hope of finding survivors in the wreckage fades quickly. The crash has killed all 46 people on board. Rescuers have recovered Flight 518's 2 flight recorders.
Good.
The flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder capture important details of what the pilots did and said. The search for answers takes them to Paris, to the French Accident Investigation Authority, the BEA. Technicians download data from the flight data recorder, or FDR. It reveals that the doomed plane hit the mountain just 6 minutes and 47 seconds after takeoff. If a mechanical failure was to blame, the FDR should have a record of it.
What is this?
But investigators face a huge problem. Certain information simply isn't there. Strangely, the FDR lacks any navigational data. It's a major setback, one that puts even more pressure on investigators to find the answers for the mourning families. They need to piece together some of the missing flight data and come up with an unorthodox way of doing it.
Tell me when you're ready. Okay?
They try to figure out the movements of the plane.
Same crap as the other day. If you want, you can start to turn, Dennis. Turning now.
Investigators are able to study every movement of the control column, the one thing that was properly recorded.
Pitch up 10 degrees.
Step by step, they piece together the flight.
Left 15 degrees now.
The recreation shows that the plane was flying normally as it flew away from the airport. But then it began to veer off course.
You see? Right here. This is when it went off course.
The finding confirms that there was a problem with navigation. But investigators can't be sure if that was due to pilot error or mechanical failure. With no hard answers from the flight data recorder, investigators in Venezuela consider some conversations captured on the cockpit voice recorder. They focus in on the last moments of the short flight, hoping to hear something that might explain why the plane veered off course.
Yeah, get to 067.
The pilots discuss their compass heading.
Dennis! We're at 074, aren't we?
What investigators hear next provides a disturbing glimpse into the flight's final seconds.
Damn, Aldino, we're at 318.
The pilots couldn't agree on where they were headed.
They have no idea where they are.
It's a key finding in the investigation.
Aldino!
A clearer picture of the flight's final moments is slowly emerging.
Aldino!
Hold on.
Investigators now know the pilots were in control of the aircraft.
Hold on. Easy, Dennis, easy.
But the question remains. Why were they so badly off course? May 31st, 2009. Air France Flight 447 is crossing the Atlantic. The Airbus A330 is flying overnight from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. 58-year-old Captain Marc Dubois is in command.
Here's the new forecast.
He's been a pilot for well over half his life and is now one of the most senior captains at Air France.
It's hard to see anything in this plane with this lighting.
First Officer Pierre-Cédric Bonin is 32 years old. He's been flying the A330 for about a year.
We are arriving at Intol.
37-year-old relief pilot David Robert is on standby. The three pilots fly in shifts to stay alert. There are 216 passengers on the 11-hour flight. Autopilot holds the plane steady at 35,000 feet. And the crew communicates with Brazilian air traffic control.
Air France 447, contact Atlantic Center.
As they fly, an onboard computer monitors the engines, hydraulics, and other systems. It also sends progress reports to Air France headquarters. Every 10 minutes, the computer transmits the plane's position along with any maintenance data.
Air France 447 calling Atlantico.
Air France 447, Atlantico, go ahead.
3 hours into the flight, the captain reports reaching a navigational waypoint off the coast of Brazil.
Air France 447 position in tow.
Maintain flight level 350.
Okay, will do.
At 1:49 a.m., the A330 leaves Brazilian radar surveillance and enters a communications dead zone over the mid-Atlantic. Two hours later, an air traffic controller in Senegal tries to contact the flight.
Air France 447, this is Dakar. Do you copy? Come in, Air France 447.
He can't reach the crew, so he alerts Air France.
Dakar for Air France. Have you heard from Air 447? Over.
Negative. Hold for Air France, please.
No one has heard from the crew of Flight 447. The only communication, 24 maintenance messages transmitted by the plane hours earlier. An Air France maintenance worker tries to make contact, but his message bounces back. Perhaps the communication system has failed. By the time the plane should have reached French airspace, controllers still can't make contact. At Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, the 11:10 a.m. arrival time comes and goes with no sign of Flight 447. The A330 would have run out of fuel by now. The airline begins notifying families. The plane has almost certainly crashed at sea. By the afternoon of June 1st, the world learns that Flight 447 from Rio to Paris has mysteriously vanished. It's one of the worst accidents in the history of commercial aviation. An advanced passenger jet is gone. 228 people are presumed dead. In Paris, French police escort the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder to Leo Sartorius' lab. After nearly 2 years of searching and theorizing, the world may finally understand what happened on board Flight 447. The answer to what went wrong may be locked in these watertight containers.
There was a lot of concern that we might take a false step that would lead to the loss of the information.
One wrong move and a 2-year search costing over $42 million will have been for nothing. Starting with the cockpit voice recorder, they carefully opened the protective casing, looking for the memory card inside.
The worst thing would have been for the actual memory cards to be broken, physically broken.
This isn't good. See the damage?
We quickly noticed that there were small parts that were broken, so we weren't sure that everything was in working order.
If technicians can't fix the cockpit voice recorder, they may never know what happened in the cockpit, or even who was flying the plane. A close examination of the second box, the flight data recorder, brings better news.
It's fine. No problems.
I think we all looked at each other and said, it's incredible that they're in this state. It's incredible. We were able to read the data very quickly.
While technicians try to repair the cockpit voice recorder, Sartorius carefully plots the data from the FDR. The FDR data reveals that the pitot tubes did in fact freeze.
The pitot tubes freeze here.
The frozen tubes produce erratic airspeed readings, causing the autopilot to shut off automatically.
The pilot takes control of the plane.
It warns the pilots very loudly. That can be a bit of a surprise, a bit of a shock. And it definitely was a shock to these pilots. And it was their reaction to this warning which was the key to everything else that followed.
All crews are taught that a frozen pitot tube should clear itself in less than a minute.
The pitots on the aircraft, they were only subject to the clogging for about 56 seconds, and after that, the airspeed readings were back to normal again.
The pilot only needs to hold the plane steady, and the problem will disappear.
But he does not hold steady.
Whoever was flying the plane pulled back and pitched the nose up instead.
Il apparu à la déconnexion du pilote automatique des actions.
When the autopilot disconnected, the pilot in command changed the pitch of the plane.
Par le pilote en fonction.
He climbs more than 2,500 feet.
If you pull the nose of an airplane up, it's going uphill, it's going to slow down.
Their speed dropped more than 90 knots in less than a minute.
Cette situation,
raising the nose of the plane at high altitude put the plane into a stall very quickly.
Dans une situation de décrochage.
In an aerodynamic stall, the wings lose lift and the plane drops from the sky.
C'est les actions des pilotes.
It was the pilot's actions that led to the stall.
They fell at more than 12,000 feet per minute.
Inexplicably, the pilot continued to pull back when he should have been pitching the plane's nose down to gain speed and lift.
The more you raise the nose, the more the lift will be destroyed. And that's what was happening to Air France 447.